and we'll get started in just a moment. All right, friends. Well, welcome. Thank you to everyone who is joining us live for today's Lunch and Learn. Tekαkαpimək Rising, the remarkable story of creating a welcome center at Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument. We are delighted to have a really fantastic panel with us today. Lucas St. Clair is president of Elliottsville Foundation. Dr. Jane Anderson is an associate professor at NYU, the co-founder of Local Contexts, and an intellectual and cultural property consultant. And James Eric Francis Sr. is Penobscot Nation's Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation and a member of the Wabanaki Advisory Board. They're here to share with us the story of bringing Tekαkαpimək to life. Thank you all for being with us. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to building a just, thriving future for all, by acting on the climate crisis, protecting the environment, and safeguarding our democracy. MCA does that by bringing people and organizations together to educate and inspire and advocate, and MCV by advocating for equitable policies, holding elected officials accountable, and winning elections. Since 2020, this weekly online Lunch and Learn series has helped us advance all of those goals, creating a shared space to explore our environmental and social history, policy priorities, climate action movement, and more. It is my favorite part of the week every week, and I'm so grateful to have so many of you join us week after week. Thank you. A few notes before we dive in. We are all here in the homeland of the Wabanaki people. I'm zooming in from Camden on the shores of Penobscot Bay, where the Penobscot and Abenaki people have lived for generations. Statements like this are often performative, and we don't typically begin our Lunch and Learn programs with land acknowledgements because, to be quite honest, I haven't wanted to make a misstep. I haven't wanted to say something that might make things worse instead of better. But land acknowledgements and the sentiments that are beneath them are potentially transformative. And when we were talking about preparing for this program, we talked about how something actually changes in our brains when we acknowledge where we are and the history of the land that we now call Maine. So I'm being bold and brave today and saying something that I'm not sure if I'm getting exactly right. And I am grateful to all of our friends who I know will give me a friendly nudge if I'm making a misstep. And I'm committed with all of you to learning and to doing better every single time. So thanks for being with us and helping me be brave. We are going to hear from people who are incredibly brave and incredibly experienced and have spent so much time thinking about all of these issues. We are so grateful for this incredible group we have today. We're going to hear from each of our speakers, and then we'll have time for your questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait, though. You can send questions to me or to Maggie Summers through the chat whenever they occur to you. We'll keep track of them and ask as many as possible in the session following the presentation. We ask that you not message our speakers directly because we want them to be able to focus on the presentation and not the chat box. If you have any technical glitches or questions today, Maggie Summers is your go-to. She will solve all the problems and work her magic. Just send her a message through the chat and she'll help you out. This event is being recorded, and you'll get a follow-up email later this afternoon with a link to the recording. The recording will also go on our YouTube page, where you'll find a whole bunch of other programs organized into different playlists so you can really focus in on the topics you are most interested in. Thank you all for joining us. And Lucas, I am going to turn things over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction and for allowing us to be here and share this work. This is exciting for me. This has been such an incredible summer to kind of reach a point of completion on this project. I think that we did a lunch and learn like this maybe 2 years ago that sort of framed up the project. So we won't go back in the past too far. And if you're curious about how we got to where we are, there is another lunch and learn. Go to the YouTube page and you can see it there. But today I'm going to speak more about the partnership and how this all was formed. So as many of you know, in 2016 on August 24th, President Barack Obama used the Antiquities Act to create Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, and that was when our family transferred the deeds of about 89,000 acres of land to the National Park Service. And you can go to the next slide. It's a tremendously beautiful place with lots of woods and lots of waters, as the name implies. And one thing that we did that was somewhat creative before the land was transferred is that we negotiated with the Department of Justice to allow us to build things on the monument that were that could be done as a private act, and we negotiated about what those things were and where they could be built. But ultimately, we decided one of the things that we could do was to build a visitor contact station. Visitor contact station is national park lingo for a building that educates and orients visitors to where they are. So when it came time for us to consider doing this, I really felt the importance of engaging with Native community in Maine to establish a understanding for national park visitors that this is the ancestral homeland of the Penobscot Nation, and there is a very active and present tribal population here in Maine, something that I think oftentimes goes overlooked. So you can go to the next slide. We began this work in earnest in 2018, and this is a picture of a group of people gathered in the Lungsus camps for our first kind of introduction to these concepts. I reached out initially to the Abbey Museum, who was working on decolonization, and asked the director at the time for some advice on how to engage with Wabanaki community. And she said, "Well, we have a advisory board here that is made up of individuals that have been referred to by the chiefs of the nations, and they make up an advisory council and inform a lot of the work that we do." So we decided we would do the same thing. We wrote a letter to the 4 chiefs and asked for the recommendations of individuals that we could hire to be consultants on this project. And we gathered for the first time at Lungsus camps. Jennifer Neptune here is the person standing, and the map on the wall is made by James Francis, and it is a map of the Penobscot watershed. The language is in Penobscot, and it has lots of references to things that are very important to the Penobscot people. And as we started thinking about what this building could be, this map informed the initial concepts and ideas. So the work began. You can go to the next slide. And I met Gabriel Frey and Suzanne Greenlaw, and they really made a point for me to understand and build relationships with individuals before we really set to designing and building the building and working together. So Gabriel was incredibly generous to offer time to go to the Maliseet lands in right outside of Houlton, where we harvested a few ash trees. The picture on the left is my son and Gabriel pounding a ash tree up on Maliseet land, and ultimately over the course of about a year made the basket, the pack basket that you see me holding on the in the right slide. And over the course of that time, I learned a huge amount of cultural and artistic importance from Gabriel and from Suzanne, and learned much more about community that really informed the kind of artistic expressions that went inside the building. You can go to the next slide. We began working on site. This is a picture of us on the very first road that was built to the site. We spent a lot of time kind of walking around trying to understand what was important about Lookout Mountain, where the building is set, and how to orient the building to really enhance the visitor experience when they come here. So this is a group of Wabanaki board members, architects, landscape architects, exhibit builders, and National Park Service employees. We spent a lot of time walking around this area and thinking about how to design the building. And you can go to the next slide. Here is working with the landscape architect and one of the individuals who designed the signs and exhibits, and James, thinking about the way in which the building sat on the landscape. The Wabanaki Advisory Board made it very clear that as the people of the Dawn, there was an orientation to have this building facing the east and have this, it's built on a ridge, and to have the building connect from the eastern side of the ridge that faces all of the Wabanaki Nations territories, and then on the other side where the building is facing the west to Katahdin and the sacred mountain that really is an important geologic feature for Wabanaki people. So here we're looking at some of those design ideas. And you can go to the next slide. Here is the final eastern lookout. This is at the complete opposite site of the building, and this gathering area faces the east. And from here you can see the territories of the four federally recognized tribes, and then in the very foreground there you can see the double curves that are part of the design elements. I think one thing that's really important to understand here, and part of the importance of this conversation that James and Jane are going to have, is as the partnership began to grow and more ideas came forward, a design emerged that was really developed by a non-native individual that was based on a Northern New England architectural vernacular. And the response from the Wabanaki Advisory Board was, this is not a building that we like. Not only does it not represent a partnership or our cultures, but it represents a colonizing construct and culture. And it was in buildings that look like this, in which people worked to appropriate our culture and erase our culture. And we really hit a moment in this project where we realized that we had to go back to the drawing board and really completely start again. And fortunately for the project, fortunately for myself, that James Francis and I had known one another and had become friends through canoeing and being up in this landscape. And he took me aside one day and said, you know, what's the problem here is that you don't understand what a cultural appropriation is, and you don't understand the way in which our culture exists in the world. And the National Park Service historically has been taking our land and our culture, and it's been going on for 100+ years. And so this is not something that we're just going to lean into and work with. unless there's some really significant agreements put into place. And fortunately for us, Jane Anderson has made a career of developing ways in which Native and non-Native people can work together to make sure that cultural appropriation and cultural erasure doesn't happen through projects like this. And we really began anew. We began anew with a completely new design for the building, and we worked on a whole series of contracts and agreements that they'll both talk about. It allowed for us to become to really create a real partnership that was based on trust and understanding. And ultimately, the project was so much more enhanced because of it, including this eastern lookout with these original double curved designs that went into it. And you can go to the next slide. The building that evolved from what was a lot of square angles and the northern New England architectural vernacular to something that was much more free flowing and representative of Native culture, and sits into the landscape in a way that it looked as if it just kind of grew out of the ground, as opposed to something that was cleared and intentionally set there. And ultimately, the project was an incredible success, where we got to, I think the next slide, where August of this year, the building was completely finished. The groundwork was done, and we had a ribbon cutting with tribal members, the Secretary of Interior, the National Park Service, members of our congressional delegation, and we're able to celebrate the completion of this partnership. And so I'll stop there and turn it over, I think, to James or Jane.
To me. You're going to hand it over to me.
All right, Jane.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here and really grateful for your time. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to share with you is something that's very unusual in this project, which was the protection of Indigenous intellectual and cultural property. If you can go to the next slide for me, Gary. So this is a photograph of Natalie, and Natalie, I know you're online, so hi. And this is the signage that you'll see as soon as you walk into the building. And this sign talks about that the Tekαkαpimək Contact Station was designed and built with Indigenous knowledges and design innovation from the Wabanaki Nations. It intentionally incorporates cultural narratives, languages, designs, images, kinship relations, ancestral representations, and contemporary cultural practices that come from these lands and waters. So Lucas mentioned when he was talking how James had said that you really need to understand cultural appropriation, and you really need to understand what's at stake when Indigenous communities are sharing their knowledge in any kinds of project. And this is partly because projects of settler colonialism have not only been about taking Indigenous land, they've also been about taking Indigenous knowledge and culture. And so if we think about settler colonialism as a structure, not an event, what that means is that those settler colonial structures are all around us, and they're largely invisible to non-Indigenous people. And so in a project like this, it became really, really important that any kind of knowledge that was going to be shared about even kind of inspiring the building and the shape of the building itself needed to have some protections in place. And the protections in place needed to be there to safeguard against cultural appropriation. Next slide, Gary. So what is cultural appropriation? Appropriation is using without permission Indigenous cultures. And here are just some very generic examples of that perhaps you've never noticed were appropriating Indigenous culture. We have it in children's films like Frozen. We have it in the Twilight books. Grand Cherokee Jeep takes Indigenous names with no permission. We have it in Land of Lakes butter. It is everywhere. It is part of settler colonial culture to take Indigenous culture and to use it without permission in any way. So because it is so normalized within our culture, this kind of recognition that Indigenous knowledge is important, it is valuable, it is critical for Indigenous survivance, was something that we really had to think about within this project from the very beginning. Next slide, Gary. And part of the reason why people don't notice cultural appropriation is that one of the first places people learn about Indigenous culture is in museums. Museums that have stolen Indigenous cultural artifacts over the hundreds of years of colonialism and put them on display for white audiences. Those items in museums are not displayed for Indigenous communities, nor are they displayed how Indigenous communities would like them to be displayed. And so when you kind of think about the relationship between broader cultural appropriation that happens within society and where that comes from and where we learn about Indigenous culture, it's not from Indigenous people themselves. It's from these white museums that have taken Indigenous culture to display not Indigenous culture with people, but the art itself without the people. And so how do you bring people back into these spaces in ways that are meaningful, in ways that recognize the violence of settler colonialism, and ways that build different kinds of futures? Next slide, please, Gary. So in 2007, the United Nations made a declaration called the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And if you haven't seen this declaration, I really encourage you to look at it. It was rejected by 4 countries. Now, you're not going to be surprised who those countries were. The United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. They have all now become signatories to this declaration, but given their histories of settler colonialism, it was no surprise that they rejected this declaration. Article 31 of that declaration speaks specifically about Indigenous people's rights to their culture, to traditional knowledge, to heritage, to cultural expressions, to sports, to medicines, to flora, to fauna, to designs, to games, to performing arts. And so we took the declaration very seriously in this project when I came in and kind of used it to lead some of the primary work we did around training folks about what is Indigenous intellectual and cultural property, what is cultural appropriation, and why does it matter in a project like this? Next slide, please, Gary. So this is an image of the initial New England farmhouse design that Lucas was speaking to. And then this is the Wabanaki inspired design that was developed later and which you've seen come to fruition. This was about when James and Suzanne Greenlaw called me to say, "Hey, Jane, we really need your help. We're not quite sure how this project is going to go, but we're really worried that our knowledge is going to be appropriated in this project." And so I listened. I remember really clearly that phone call and listened, and I was kind of thinking about, well, what could be done? This project has already started. These things should have been thought about at the beginning. But through those conversations, came up with a strategy. And unfortunately, the strategy meant stopping the project until everybody had been trained to understand why this mattered and how important it was to get it right. And kudos to Lucas, who took that move. It had to happen at a leadership level in order to kind of make valuable the training that was then going to happen for over 75 people as part of this project. So that kind of turned the project around, and in an important way, because people became more aware of things that had been sitting there, but they hadn't been able to name as cultural appropriation. It gave people a language. It gave the Wabanaki Council a language to say, well, actually, no, we don't really want it that way. It gave people voice. And importantly, it started to build trust. The trust wasn't there to start with, and the trust didn't come through just the training. The trust started through people being more aware of what was actually going on and what was needed. Next slide, please, Gary. So one of the kind of key next steps after some of the training was really working with the Wabanaki Council to develop a memorandum of understanding between the kind of primary parties in relationship to this project. And this memorandum of understanding was really significant because it dealt with consent. It dealt with attribution. It dealt with acknowledgement. It dealt with governance, who makes decisions and how do people know who's making decisions. It dealt with decision-making, and it dealt with benefit sharing. So they were kind of like key elements that were then really built into this project and have manifestly changed the outcomes of this project in ways that are incredibly positive and incredibly meaningful. So I'll just end, and Gary, that last. So it was relationship building, trust building, over really long periods of time. This didn't happen immediately, and it never happens immediately. We need people to come together. This project was also being done during COVID. So how people could actually get together and meet and engage with each other as people was really, really hard. And this is a photo of the first gathering that we had after the first rounds of training. And it was great to get together to kind of feel that we were starting to stand together. And again, with baby steps. Last slide, Gary. So this is the signage that is now in the Tekαkαpimək Visitor Contact Station. It speaks specifically to the Wabanaki knowledge that was shared in the making of the building that you might not see, but also all the works that have been contributed into this space. And it ensures that Wabanaki knowledge will be protected for future generations. And that is a groundbreaking agreement. It led to an agreement with the National Park Service to extend that protection. And it changes what you see when you're in the building. And that's an invitation to be differently aware of whose knowledge it is, where it comes from, and upon whose land you're standing. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Lucas. And thank you for advancing the slides, Gary. Please advance. So Tekαkαpimək, as far as one can see. So when it came time to really think about the name of the visitor contact stations, it was a few names that were kicked around. And as part of the Wabanaki Advisory Board, we talked quite a bit about, well, it should be indigenous, and this is Penobscot homeland, so it should be in Penobscot. And so as someone who has studied indigenous landscapes for decades, I set about kind of researching, and names like Three Rivers came up because of the confluence of the East Branch, the Saboas, and the Wasadakwick are in that area. But it sits atop what we call Lookout Mountain. And so we came up with this term in Penobscot, the Tekαkαpimək, because it evokes a visual from a lookout mountain. It's as far as one can see. But what's interesting about this word, and that's kind of echoed inside the design elements of the building, is that the Tekαkαpimək is a canoe term. It's a travel term. And the East Branch of the Penobscot, where these are, was a travel corridor for all Wabanaki people, linking Penobscot territory to Aroostook River and Maliseet territory. So it was like a very important thing. And what the Tekαkαpimək really comes from is when we would travel rivers and gave directions, you would give people directions to go 10 looks up a river. And so you would look to see how far you could see and then paddle to that place. And then once you were at that place, you'd look again to see how far you could see. And you'd keep track of those looks. So that one look is the Tekαkαpimək. It's as far as one can see. So it incorporates so many different elements that kind of permeate through the space, through the environment where the building sits, the culture. And also, really, I've been using it metaphorically to talk about this entire project. That as we look at this beautiful building and this gem on top of the hill, it's also important to know, for me, that building is second. It's the second most important thing we built. the first thing was the relationships and how to do a project like this properly. And that is really, for me, the important thing. And this building can be used as a model to see how far we can see into the future as the human race and how we can work together better to put more gems in the world. Gary, can you advance the slide, please? So although Penobscot territory, it was important to embrace our Wabanaki brothers and sisters because this, there is this kind of territoriality, there's blurred lines and there's travel corridors. And so we really wanted to honor our Wabanaki brothers and sisters as we came to the table. And one of the things we wanted to do was to introduce as a design element into this project was take the traditional design motif, which is called the double curve, which it's dominant in Wabanaki cultures. And let's develop brand new ones. Let's design as a Wabanaki advisory board, a double curve that represents us collectively, shown here in a circle, but also has features to it, each individual that are important to each of the tribes that are involved. For instance, the lower left hand, is a Penobscot double curve, and it has two waves which represent the east branch and the west branch of the Penobscot. And the west branch and the east branch of the Penobscots embrace Katahdin. And so you see Katahdin sitting between them. So each of these elements, Passamaquoddies have a whale's tail because they're closer to the ocean, and they have two villages, so they have two features that show that. Micmac furthest east, so they get the sunrise, and they get this pedestal and this thing that goes above, which represent caribou horns, because we have also wanted to show some of those creatures that are no longer in this place that they would have also considered a homeland. And then the Maliseets really evoked as two portages that link us to the Maliseet country from this place, but also ash and sweetgrass and, the tradition of basket making. And so you could talk about these for so long, but you'll see them repeated and used, and it's the double curve that's in the center of the eastern lookout. So let's move forward, Gary. So my work as an indigenous geographer, I felt it was really important that people understand where the visitor contact station is, both in relation to the Penobscot River, but in the larger landscape. And so I proposed to the project to do a large map that started at Penobscot Bay, came up the Penobscot River, and this map would somehow be featured on the floor. And it ended up being etched into the floor. We'll see some images of that later. But this is me early doing some map research and some drawing of that map. Next, Gary. So one of the things that happened through this project, and Jane called it trust, but I really see it as a safety net. And it really allowed Wabanaki voice to be secure in that we could make expressions that were near and dear to us in some way and near and dear to our culture. And we knew that it wouldn't be appropriated, that it was protected. And so that really allowed us to delve into things that we probably wouldn't have before. And in this case, the oral tradition of the water famine, and sometimes called the frog monster, which became a key feature in this area because this is the birth of the Penobscot River. And, through our research, this was a birth that took place just down the hill from the Tekαkαpimək. And so this painting was done by myself, and also just to the left in the window, it's not in this picture, was also a frog monster in ice, which points to our geologic past and thinking about oral traditions in a different way. And but I think the really important thing here to understand is that the Wabanaki expressions that take place in this space probably wouldn't have happened without all the safeguards put into this project. Next, please. So here's some of the flooring. This was all hand drawn. I am kind of a map nerd and really like old maps and wanted the floor to kind of feel like an old map. And even the grout lines of the tile remind me of when you unfold an old map. It has those little gaps where the folds were. But you can actually walk through the building and follow the same path that our ancestors did as they migrated up and down these rivers. Go ahead, Gary. So above the service desk or the information desk of the Tekαkαpimək Visitor Contact Station was a piece of art that Gabriel Frey led, and he brought in many other weavers, and they decided to use non-traditional materials. And they actually used copper, different types of patina on copper, whether let it oxidize or not, and they wove this. And what's really interesting for me is this piece as it runs across the ceiling and is in kind of a wave form, and then it kind of arcs down the wall. It almost feels like you're underwater, under a waterfall even. And so it's a really nice feature, and it brings this idea of water and canoeing and all the elements that really are featured in this place. Go ahead, Gary. So the double curves also were presented linear, in a straight line and not in the circle. And those were used in a tile project. And Suzanne Greenlaw, this was really her brainchild, that she wanted to ensure that, the Wabanaki presence would be throughout the building, even when you were washing your hands after using the bathroom, that the tiles on the wall featured Wabanaki content. And so the double curves were made into these clay tiles, but also other Wabanaki imagery from Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq people. So just beautiful handmade tiles. And the thing about this project that I thought was just brilliant. Suzanne had brought in Dr. Bonnie Newsom, who studies ancient ceramics. So as Wabanaki people, we have had ceramics in a ceramic period within our history. And so Bonnie came in and worked with the clay tile people and learned how to process clay the way our ancestors did. And although clay tiles was never our end goal, it was nice to get that kind of cultural education piece into this. And just brilliant idea, Suzanne. Next. So Gabriel Frey, whose hands are all over this project, and really wanted to take the design of the double curves, and he carved them into wood as a door handle design. and then they were later cast in bronze, and you see them here on the door. And talking with the Wabanaki Advisory Board about this concept, it was, he says he wanted them to feel Wabanaki culture even before entering the door, so that you had to touch our culture before even able to get into the building. And these are beautiful. They are exceptional pieces of art, and I want the wooden ones because they just the bronze got installed. Next, please. So this is a picture of the space. We call it the east-west line, and it goes from on the site from the eastern lookout to the gah-gah building itself. And what's interesting about this, and this picture really doesn't reflect this, but we wanted to have these kind of woven paths that kind of come together and then break off, and have these literal islands of vegetation, unlandscaped vegetation, natural vegetation that was already there. But they feel like islands. They feel like, this kind of riverine feel to these paths. So it's a really, really nice feature. And go ahead, Gary. And, this is Jennifer Neptune. She's the lead interpretive writer for the project. She's also my lovely wife. But her happily holding an Atlantic salmon, and Jennifer went round and round about these salmon because for her it had to be right. It had to be the right kind of salmon, and mock-ups and drawings that were coming were Chinook salmon from out west, and she's like, no. And so finally, by the time they got the salmon right, this is her at the studio where they were 3D printing these salmon and getting ready for paint. But Jennifer, really, the interpretation of the site, it was incredible, because you have a lot of voices from the Wabanaki Advisory Board talking about what they wanted for interpretation, and through all of these interpretive exercises. And then, we kind of had to look at, well, what's here in the landscape was a really important thing. What is relevant to place? But also, National Park Service had restrictions on how they could do it. And then, so she had all of these restrictions, and then she had to write and do that all within like 6 words. So it's a very limited amount of wording. And so what she came up is just magical. The words that landed on the wall are literal poetry. And so, but it's her attention to that detail and her attention to the Wabanaki Advisory voices, and also the voice of the landscape, that really informed her about how to interpret this landscape, because it's through that interpretation that you leave the building and you go out into the landscape where this national monument sits. That's what's informing you. And so Jennifer realized that very early on and captured it in a beautiful, beautiful way. Go ahead, Gary. So you can see these salmon as they swim up the wall. And this is in all their stages, so from small fries all the way to, spawning female as they're laying their eggs. And they go up the wall. And in the window to the left, you kind of see that salmon-colored salmon. That's actually, I think, alabaster or something, carved by Penobscot artist Tim Shea. And so this really evokes, again, that understanding of a species that is no longer adjacent to the monument, that this species has not returned home yet, that there are there are obstacles for salmon. And so I hope this is an exhibit that helps them to be welcomed back to higher waters in the watershed. Go ahead, Gary. As mentioned earlier, we knew early on that the design concept wanted to have something to do with travel and water. And what do you travel in water in? And it's a canoe. And you can see this shape as it comes up the wall. It's, you know, very abstract, but the slatting, those vertical slattings within the exhibit design really evoke that traditional watercraft feel. And it is throughout the space, and it helps to really kind of help transport people, you know, from a time and a place of now to ancient waters and you know, ancient peoples. Go ahead, Gary. So here you can see that this is the ceiling. Well, part of it on the left, you can see the ceiling as it kind of waves above the desk there. A beautiful piece. But then there was this piece done by a Micmac artist, I believe Shane Pearly Dutcher, and just again bringing that copper down off the ceiling and having this ribbon of these fish, these different fish that kind of swim through this band, really again allowed us to tell stories and through permanent interpretation in the space in places as you know, benign as the desk. Also on the left, you see these, you see a fireplace and then a brown banner that's actually metal, and on it is artwork done by Jennifer Neptune, and each one of these are featured with a poem. But these were inspired by Passamaquoddy artist Toma Joseph, who etched birch bark, and there are excellent pieces in museums all over this country of Toma Joe's work. And Jennifer, although this is her art, she really took inspiration from how he presented animals. In fact, you know, my shirt today is from one of those pieces. And but it's really, again, a way to honor all Wabanaki peoples and put a design element that really they stand out great against the wooden building. Next, Gary. So really what's been happening next? So there are a few things that have been happening, and one of them is and we have a picture of Natalie that I took just a few days ago at sunrise at the Eastern Lookout. You can see it below. But something that Natalie coined as the invisible monument. You know, this idea of how can we share this project and have this project live on and influence other projects. And so that's a piece that we continue to work on even to today. The middle photograph is the Umble-Dumpkin canoe. Umble-Dumpkin canoe is what we've been affectionately called Luke's canoe for a long time. But Lucas had ordered a birch bark canoe and worked with Wabanaki artist and Steve Kayard to build this canoe. It finished a couple Sundays ago, and it's going to be launched on October 5th for the first time in a very ceremonious way in the East Branch of the Penobscot River, just down the hill from Tekαkαpimək. And the third thing is the Wabanaki Benefits Foundation. So a foundation that was started with a generous gift, and it was got nonprofit status, and they are now looking to grow that gift so that they can start to provide funds for Wabanaki communities to help benefit all sorts of programs. Next, please. Oh, I'm going to invite Jane back to, so as we just saw all these projects, and there were so many more, we couldn't fit them all in here. But as we really think about the importance of this project, it's also important to understand none of that would have happened without these assurances in place. And I want to thank Jane for coming on board to doing this. But we wanted to show you exactly, what this means. And so, Jane, could you share what this is?
Yes, so there are important, sometimes intellectual property law is really, really boring, but in this instance, it's really, really exciting because it allows for a different kind of recognition of Wabanaki knowledge, culture, lifeways, and how central they are and remain to this project. So this is a architectural documents, or the kind of instruments of service that will be deposited with the Department of Interior. But you'll notice that all the documents always recognize Wabanaki Nations and their knowledge and designs and the work that's gone into this, into Tekαkαpimək. It also was kind of groundbreaking that all the artists' contracts were not extractive contracts. They were ones that were deeply thought about, that had all these different components in them that meant that the artists retained all their intellectual and cultural property. They were clear about attribution, and as you walk through the building, you can see all the artists' names are properly there, and that really matters. And they also address kind of control and future use. So this is kind of just one example of that, and it would be a little tedious to show many slides of many different agreements, but there are many different agreements, and they all center Wabanaki control and ownership over intellectual and cultural property.
Thank you, Jane. I think we'll invite Lucas back. Yeah. Hi, Lucas.
Yeah. Hi, James. Thank you so much for that. It's so fun to kind of relive that experience and see all of those things that have come to real life. And I'm sure that everyone on this call is extraordinarily excited to go and see it for themselves. The building is only going to be open for a few days this fall as the Park Service moves in and starts to organize the space for themselves. But we have decided to open it up for fall visitation. So Saturday and Sunday, September 28th and 29th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. the building's going to open. It'll be open that weekend and will be coincide with the Dark Sky Festival, which we call Stars Over Katahdin, a Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters event. That is really, really fun to go. Park Service rangers will sort of give you a tour of the night sky, and it's a as probably most of you know, Katahdin Woods and Waters is one of the very few dark sky, internationally recognized dark sky sanctuaries. So Saturday and Sunday, September 28th and 29th. And you can register for that event at friendsofkatahdinwoodsandwaters.org/Tekαkαpimək. We are requiring registration, and in order to go, you have to be registered in order for this to work with the Park Service and the special use permits that they've granted us. So please go online and do that. And then on Indigenous Peoples Weekend, on Sunday and Monday, October 13th and 14th, the building will be open again from 10 to 3. And other than those times, the building will be closed, and we'll begin having it open to the public in the spring, late spring, early summer of 2025, and you'll be able to follow along that opening schedule at the National Park Service's website. So, should we open it up for questions?
Well, first I have to just say a very, very deep thank you to each of you, to James, to Jane, to Lucas, for the work that you have done. And I know you're just a few of the many people who have been involved in this. So thank you for representing that collective effort. so beautifully this morning. And thank you for sharing the information about the fall visit dates. I know a lot of the comments that we got throughout this program were, when can I go? So thank you for answering that question first off. We are going to share all of that information as well as the registration link in the email that you'll get later this afternoon. We'll also include a link to become a friend of Katahdin Woods and Waters, and a whole bunch of other things, including our plan to answer as many of your questions as we can. We knew it was a tall order to go deep onto this really interesting and important work and have time for all of your questions. And we decided to focus on our presenters, and we will have a plan to get answers for all of those good questions. So look for that later this afternoon. I do want to just share, or let's just get a couple of questions in though. First off, Katahdin Woods and Waters exists on stolen Wabanaki lands. Do Wabanaki people have special access to the national monument, the area around the contact station, for collecting plants, medicines, cultural practices? Tell us what that looks like.
So the Penobscot Nation, we have signed a general agreement with the National Park Service, and there is no specifics about those types of harvesting, but it certainly leaves the door open for relationships moving into the future. There is access in Acadia and to well, they're working on it with sweetgrass, and I know we harvested some spruce root for the Obeldumpkin canoe within Acadia, but it's those agreements at Acadia, that's National Park Service, also will be transferred over to Katahdin Woods and Waters. So yes, in the future, absolutely.
That's so important, and it's good to know that there are some positive things happening in the National Park Service. This tell me though, I want this to be the gold standard. I want this to be the norm. I have a feeling that's not the case. Tell me what the plan is for sharing this learning, so that this kind of collaboration happens not just in Katahdin Woods and Waters, but in all of the places that the National Park Service is occupying Indigenous land.
Well, I'll start by saying that a lot of the work is being documented. So the invisible monument that James described, we're working on creating a resource that can be shared. And it certainly has been something. I know that a lot of communities around the country that are adjacent to public lands are thinking about how to use some of the tools that Jane has provided. I know her dance card has gotten a lot busier recently. And James, go ahead. I know you had a couple thoughts as well.
Well, you stole my thunder, so you're all set. I was going to mention the invisible monument, that this doesn't need to just stay within national park, that this is a model for all federal organizations, or all federal organizations, or non-federal or non-governmental. You want to engage with Indigenous people, have us at the table at the beginning, not the 11th hour, and be willing to work collaboratively. And I want to thank you, Lucas, for being willing to do exactly that. This is a true testament for you opening your mind and changing the course of something very drastically. So I thank you for doing that.
Thanks, James. And I think to Kathleen's point at the beginning of this is this is an exercise in rewiring the way we think about relationship, and it continues to strengthen our ability to work toward justice. And, there are, I think, probably many of us on this call, non-native communities that have been working in the environmental conservation space for a long time. And there are a lot of lessons about how we can do it in a more just and equitable way through this project. And I really love the fact that you leaned into the concern that we may make mistakes. Believe me, I have made many, many, many mistakes and stumbled my way along through this project. And because of the recognition and grace that has been provided to me by this project, it's allowed me to kind of say, oh, well, dust myself off and not hold on to this certain ways of thinking, but allowing ourselves to evolve. As many of you will see in real life, and you've seen today, the outcomes can be really profound.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish we could keep going. I do want to say, speaking of justice, please plan to join us next week. We will have a really special program on the Healing to Wellness Court, which is a really innovative program that the Penobscot Nation, that marries Penobscot traditions and the justice system to help individuals who are facing substance abuse and mental health challenges. And we will have Chief Justice Eric Maynard and Judge Rhonda DeContal with us next week. There'll be information about that in the follow-up email as well. We all have so much learning and so many relationships to build together. I'm grateful to be in such phenomenal company with all of you, and really grateful, James, Lucas, and Jane, for your time and your expertise and your heart. So thank you all, and yeah, we'll see you at the contact station next weekend.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.